We're
This
broadcasting.
could be an hour of us.
It is an hour of us, Patrick. We are live, so I get to introduce you. For people who don't know, today's guest on our webinar is Patrick Garry, who is our OLAP. What is your assistant director of OLAP, which is the Ohio Lawyers Assistance Program? Did I have that
I
right?
believe I'm an associate director.
Oh, okay. I just call him the OLAP guy in Southwest Ohio. So, as most of you know, I'm the chair of the Health and Wellbeing Committee at the Bar Association. We are going into our 8th year as an part of the bar. And during this COVID crisis, we have done a webinar on meditation with Gary Powell, which was 2 weeks ago. And you can get that on the CBA's YouTube channel. And this will also probably be on the YouTube channel as well. We've all had a great deal of change thrust upon us in the last month. I just looked it up and it looks like we've pretty much been sheltering in place since March the 17th. I think that's fair to say. And at this point, it looks like maybe we may have some quasi-normal return to operation on May 1st, except I did get a notice from Kentucky that no in-person court hearings are going to be held for the entire month of May. So today Patrick is here to talk to us about how to navigate COVID-19. And he's brought some slides with him about the group feelings that we all have. But before we get there, I thought that we could have a little chat with Pat, and he can tell us how he's doing in the stay-at-home universe.
Well,
Thank you, Pat.
thanks, Tabitha, and Katie Lawrence for setting all this up, the Bar Association. Well, I've never, navigated this before, and yet I've got some experience with things that are beyond my control. And so, and I was willing to ask for some help on this. And so Megan Snyder, who's one of our clinical people in Columbus, assembled this little PowerPoint. So we have a frame to work with that she assembled for now a few purposes, but she's already presented it. And I'll do my best to present it as well as she did. As further opening goes, or just kind of broad commentary, I think that, I said to Tabitha before we got started, in all of history, you have these patterns, and just seasonally, you have winter and spring and fall, summer and fall and winter and spring, and those are acceptable. We've become accustomed to them, and we make adjustments. And this is somehow different, and maybe somehow the same. You prepare for winter and you watch animals do it, and we do it, and all the rest of it. And personally, I'm a person in long-term recovery from alcoholism and my own thinking, I suppose. And so in some ways, it seems as though I'm almost being invited to ask, and this may be a bit self-centered, but I'm being invited to ask, to kind of share, like, hey, how do you do life? Because I think this is kind of right up the alley of those who are in recovery already, and that is day to day. And you take things as they are, and you try to control what you can, and you accept what you can't control. And I think maybe it's the American experience, but it's probably bigger than that. You know, we have this idea that we have quite a bit of control. And I think this should kind of smash any remaining delusion that we do, if that needs to be done. And yet that's good news. We know we can't control this thing. It's a good starting point. We know life's challenging. That's another good starting point. And there's a certain pain and discomfort and uncertainty. And that's another good starting point. And at the same time, we've all got some capacity. And in this environment, we still have capacity. And so there's some, you know, hopefully instincts that kick in, and some that may not be so natural. And that might be, you know, for example, to, you know, ask for some help. I have until May 14th, I had a long relationship with a woman who died on the 14th, who was 106. And, you know, you'd ask her something and she had quite a perspective. And that is probably useful at a time like this as well. You know, there's just goofy, you know, if you cut the grass and you run over, I think they're ground hornets or something like that, you make a very quick adjustment. And I know one fellow who actually went to his garage and poured a little gasoline into the hole and lit it on fire, and it blew up his front yard. A terrible explosion. The fire department arrived. And that probably wasn't the adjustment that was called for. And so, you know, that's one way to do it, but that's probably not wise. And so I think in this environment, we have to execute a little wisdom.
For purposes of the chat, if people want to weigh in on how they've been doing, you can use the chat function, which is at the bottom of your screen, or you could send a question to us. And we're going to have question and answer at the end. But if you have a topic that you think is relevant, that you want us to look at, we'd love to hear from you. Personally, what I see people doing, Pat, you're one of the lucky ones. I think that your recovery has framed the way you accept uncertainty in a very positive way. I think the uncertainty about the future of our business as lawyers and the future of our society and the economy are all huge stressors for people. And I find that it's challenged me to manage an employee from home who's also working from home. It's also challenged me to be focused because a lot of the things that annoy me about the practice of law seem to annoy me more. A lot of the things that I don't want to do seem to not, I still don't want to do them. So, you know, I've tried to set aside time to catch up on things that I felt like I needed to do. And I feel like I put more pressure on myself to be productive, which I don't really know is healthy in this environment. So have you had any changes to the way you've practiced? I'm assuming that your in-court time has pretty much ceased, like the rest of us.
It stopped. And businesses dried up. You know, in my criminal practice, it's really, really slowed down to, you know, kind of near nothing. And it's frightening that way. At the same time, and this is two different worlds. I think we were talking about this beforehand. I know we were. And that is, you know, presently, we are able to pay our bills, and we can do that for some months. I mean, that can be done. For years, we've saved more than we've spent. And I'm sorry, we've not saved more than we've spent. We've saved, rather, let's say this right, spent less than we've earned, saved money. And so, there's two different worlds in a way between folks who are, if it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, my shelter's assured, food, assuming a supply line, is assured. And, we're actually in a position to be in some small ways of some useful to other people, helpful in some ways. And so, that probably really distinguishes. I'm not spending a lot of time, nor will I, or energy, I should say, on, hey, what does the wreckage of my future look like? I've done plenty of that in my life, but it takes a strange discipline to stay off of it. But I'm capable of that, and it's something I've worked on a lot, because I've got a brain that'll kind of track that way quite a bit. I can attract fear quickly, and yet I also know that it's kind of a corrosive thread in anyone's life. And it's not to say we shouldn't be cautious. I think our training in some ways is to look at possibilities. And yet I'm trying to focus, if I'm playing with the future, on decent outcomes. One of the things I'm wanting to do this week is notice purple irises or orange daylilies. That seems a little off, but we'll see what happens.
It kind of leads me to the next topic of positive things. I think I said to you yesterday when we talked, what I've noticed is the abundance of creativity that people have tapped into to help them cope. Whether it's the doctor at Christ Hospital who made a video like Billy Joel and instead of Piano Man called it Corona Man, or it's the people I see on social media baking bread, or my own making masks. I've got out my sewing machine and refreshed my memory on how to sew. And it felt like at one point that was something productive that I could do. And honestly, if you see people out with funky striped colored masks, you'll know they probably came from my house. So but it's also the other positive thing I noticed, in addition to creativity, is that we're more inclined to give to others who do not have. What I've noticed myself is there something else that I can do to help somebody else, to ease somebody else's stress or suffering? Whether that's a little bit of money to the hairdresser that I'm no longer able to see, or to people who have waited on me and are waitresses or whatever that can no longer do that. It truly is that we're all in there together. Are there positive things that you've seen that have come out of this that you feel like gives you kind of a glimmer of hope about what people are doing to weather the storm?
Sure. Yeah. I think people are doing, this is kind of a universal statement I've come to think is true. Everyone is doing presently what works for them. And I guess that's kind of self-evident. And yet I've certainly seen people kind of stretch a little bit and into a zone that they've not been in before. I watched little Millie around the corner and her mother take a big long walk. It probably was a mile. They were headed out yesterday. Millie's got a stack of notes that she's, I don't know, she's 4 or 6 or something like that. She's gonna hand them out to her classmates. And mom's eyes are rolling in her head because I don't think mom is so anxious to do postal delivery. But of course she is. she's Millie's mom. And I think of that even just yesterday. I'm like, wow, there's something to learn from right there. Personally, we were making some little donations for about a week, and then I think we ran out of money. But we were consciously trying to place a few dollars here and a few dollars there. And then within the neighborhood, I've been sending out my purple slaw. I shred purple cabbage and make some stuff and hand that out. And I've done some overnight lentils in the crock pot, handed those. Just kind of had a little fun with that. But my hope is that people are simply bringing their best selves to the table and taking a look at, hey, what's with me that would stop you during all this. In some ways, this is just an interesting calling. And at the same time, it's a new one. It's an odd one. On Easter, I made this. I happen to have this near my desk. I think the camera can see this. And I told somebody, I drawed that. I know it's not very good. It didn't take very long. But I don't know. It was something, took a few minutes. I did it, and that was the end of it. But I haven't done that. I had a drawing contest with a kid about 15 years ago. But other than that, it's been a while.
Well, I think that there's a neurological value to some of those things. I always tell people there are contemplative activities that don't necessarily mean meditation. You could knit, you could do gardening, you can do a lot of things that will calm you and also, make your life better without necessarily doing meditation of any variety. I know that you do yoga. I'm trying to learn yoga while this is going on, although, I'm missing my gym habit a lot. But my husband and I have started taking walks in our neighborhood, and we've never really been one to walk in the park that's around the corner from our house. So, we are all challenged to find new things. I personally have learned that I'm not really good at not being occupied in terms of my work life. Although I have gotten great joy out of writing blogs for the Bar Association and doing these webinars. So I think maybe I've just shifted some of that energy to something that I feel like is very important. So
yeah,
who knows? There are a lot of people worried about money, a lot of lawyers who've lost their jobs, lawyers at foreclosure firms who've been laid off, people that work at the prosecutor's office at the city and the public defender's office for the city, they've been laid off. But I think the other thing you have to worry about is what's going to change within our industry in terms of there's going to be a whole set of issues legally that are going to come out of this that are going to challenge all of us. And for some of us, our practice will get busy. And as you do criminal law, crimes will happen again, right?
Yeah.
So it's important to remember that this is all temporary.
Yeah.
It's not a permanent state that we're in, and the state that we're entering is not going to be what it was before.
Yeah. And I think that's, I say unknown, but we're a pretty bright crew. And some of that can not only be anticipated, but then you might move in this direction. I would guess that there would be some level of bankruptcy. And perhaps it'd be wise if you were interested in such a thing as to approach an attorney that practices in bankruptcy and say, do you need some help? That's a possibility. It's a simple one. It just comes to my mind, comes to a simple mind. But that style, that process of, hey, maybe I should head in a direction that I should go, even if it's uncomfortable.
Right. And the concept of fear, as you said earlier, to me, fear tells you where you need to go.
Sure it does.
We have to get to the after of this. We can't just stay stuck in the fear of if we open up and things don't go well, because things are probably going to be rocky for a while.
Yeah.
And we have to acknowledge that that's there and figure out the best way to take care of ourselves. And what you do well because of your recovery is you do take care of yourself well.
Yeah, I've worked on that. And I do think.
But what tips do you have for others that they could tap into based on your own, knowledge of the recovery community or something of that nature?
I had this thought in the cold shower that I took this morning. I go off road a little bit. I digress. Somebody put me in touch with a guy on YouTube or Netflix somewhere named Wim Hof. And this strange guy takes cold showers. He thinks it's good for him. I'm like, well, I'm open to that. And for a long time, I've taken some cold showers. But I digress. During that cold shower, your brain starts to go kind of fast. But the thing I thought of was a couple of them. One is my day is got a certain script to it. And it's not quite militaristic, but it at all, because there's a certain free flow to it. But on the other hand, I'm getting out of bed reasonably early. That's with or without a coffee maker that's set. That's with or without some push-ups. That's, certainly with kind of cleanup and dress, these very basic things that I think we've already heard and are common sense for a lot of people, but maybe not for folks that are in some way forced to be at home. And so there's certain structure to all that. There's a certain food prep, all the rest of it. I happen to not be a person that eats in the morning, so there's none of that in the morning. But here's one that came in the shower was, and again, it's something I have been aware that I focus upon perhaps too much, but I think it's such a universal phenomena. And that is people who've been affected by alcoholism. And this isn't people who have alcoholism. This is people affected by it. Intergenerational family disease. Perhaps cultural, who knows. But I had this idea that with virtual meetings, and I've been on plenty of them in my 12-step existence, if you want to take an hour, if you can identify, sometimes it's a matter of leaving this world of denial or delusion, but if you can identify some effect you've had from alcoholism, family or otherwise, and join a virtual meeting. You don't have to be seen. You don't have to walk in anywhere. You don't have to identify yourself. You can put a fake name at the bottom of your little screen there and take a look at that. That was just something that came to me today, but it was also kind of a little off the wall sounding, but no safer time. I'm looking at all the opportunity that this environment offers, and that was one of them. Certainly there's some opportunity for, I joked with Tabitha earlier, doing some push-ups. I had the jump rope out today. The jump rope, I mean, who's got a jump rope? I have several and don't use them much until recently. But that sort of thing presents itself, and it's a matter of, in my experience, of taking whatever energy you've got for something useful, using it up. It will be replaced with much more, probably more. My experience is more. But there is this trick of taking that kind of action and moving on. I don't know if that answers the question. It seemed to be something I wanted to say, though, Tabitha.
Well, I think you've described some things that I've talked about in the past, which is self-care. And that means getting up and getting clothes on and getting a shower. You know, I mean, when you don't leave your house, your motivation for hygiene can get hijacked. Your motivation to keep your work time, sleep, and wake time can get hijacked. I personally try to maintain the same schedule. I have actually started doing more meditation practices and using Gary Powell's Legally Mindful app in the last few days, which I've found has really kind of helped keep my brain calm, because part of my issue is that my brain continues to work and when I don't necessarily need it to, right? A lot of chatter up there, a lot of, why aren't you getting this done? Why isn't this being done? You could be doing this. Why don't you do this? Well, I don't want to work on that case. Like, so my question to you was, what are you learning from this? And what you're telling me is to do the things that you've always done.
Yeah,
ground you in your life.
And beyond, because being at home, I happen to be a note writer. You can write notes.
I have several of your notes.
I've written you a note. Yeah. Post office delivered it to you. And I don't know, there's something therapeutic about that. I got through my basement, which is a little bit of a trick. Apparently, if you are, if you're wealthy and you collect things, you're a collector. And if you're not, you're just a hoarder. And I'm a hoarder. But I was pulling things apart in a serious note. I got rid of some things, but I don't have a lot of things necessarily to get rid of. But I went through plenty of, I call it archives. And some of it's, some children's drawings, and some of it's, stuff that I've maintained. But in all that, there are names and histories and files and, stuff that needs to be closed in one way or another. And I've been able to use, just with this little phone, send some pictures to people from the past. And it's been heartwarming, and it started a bit of dialogue. I've certainly reconnected with certain folks, not ongoing. I can't look at these screens as often as some people can, or with as much time as a lot of people are capable of. But I can certainly respond to a text and initiate one. And it's a strange level of connection. But in addition to doing the things that, presumably we've been doing well, we can kind of add to it a little bit. And it's a real interesting time to focus, and it's quite rewarding. I'm here to tell you. I mean, you probably know. And it's unusual. I don't want to discount how unusual, uncomfortable this is. And also don't discount, speaking to people who've been challenged and who've met challenges. I've always had opportunities for that. I say always, but certainly I'm really aware of the last 18 years, but always had opportunities for people who've been through some tough stuff. And you ask them, how do you get through something? And fascinating and very organic conversation to listen. We have not been on Netflix as much as some people, but we've watched a lot of something called Peaky Blinders. There's a certain amount of, it's a BBC production. I'm not.
My husband and I are what I consider classic television viewers. Things like Rockford Files get streamed at our house. But it's interesting to find those things that you enjoy. I have not watched Tiger King. I refuse to watch Tiger King.
No, I've missed that one. Hey, James Rockford, while we're there,
But I have watched Turn, which is this drama that was on AMC about Washington spies during the Revolutionary War. And I'm like, it was a really good thing. My husband and I have watched it all before, but it's like,
What was the name?
Turn. In the beginning, I was like, we can only watch positive movies. By positive, I mean Fred Astaire, James Garner movie called Victor Victoria, things that kind of provide you with some more lighthearted viewing. I do not watch cable news. I don't. I read. I have, as we've talked podcasts, but I usually read a little bit of the news from sources that I consider trustworthy. And I try to stay away from social media for a large part of it, because it doesn't help me. And sometimes, especially if I'm reading things like the economy's tanking and nobody's going to have a job and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, I can go down that, oh my God, economically we're screwed rabbit hole, as I call it. So, and that gets us to where we probably should look at these slides. So,
yeah. Hey, I'll say something about Rockford, James Rockford, for those of you old enough to know who that is. That's a guy who got hit in the mouth, I think, every time he was on TV. Someone would hit him in the mouth. And then he'd respond. He'd be okay. He'd get to it. He'd do whatever he had to do. Why is this so hard? Well, we can read about this. And I don't think in our generation, and again, I don't think we've had this sort of, well, I'm sure this is kind of novel worldwide, but with wars and plagues and all the rest of it, I just don't think, I don't know how Korea and Vietnam qualify. They certainly fit in somehow, but we've really not had anything quite like this. And I think we've been in some way distracted from the idea that we ever could. And so this is new, different, difficult, and it is communal, which is probably good in a lot of ways. But in another way, everyone in some way is challenged at the same time. That's not always the case with loss.
When we talked about that yesterday, we were talking about how, 9/11 happened, and while it happened to our country, it really happened to New Yorkers in terms of the actual physical event. And this is everywhere. And so it challenges us to realize that we're vulnerable to things that we would have thought as an advanced, medically, that we would never have had another 1918 Spanish flu type situation. So now the generation that I'm in, which is the generation you're in, and generations after us have never really experienced, even when we've gone to war, the cost of war at home.
Yep.
So it's a psychological issue as well as a medical issue, as well as a financial issue, right?
That's right.
Ooh, there are more reasons why. Wow. Like I just said, job, freedom, social connections. I miss real people. I love my video screens. I love my phone. I like text messaging, but I go to my office a couple of times a week to get mail, and I'm happy when there's somebody there that I can say hello to as a real person from 6 feet away.
That's right.
So my husband and I are both working at home, and he has one level and I have the bottom level with my own office. So we managed to have lunch together and then go back to our respective jobs. But, we had a social life, and we miss those friends. So I definitely have felt all of these losses, I think more so than probably you have. But.
Yeah. Well, we went out last night for a walk with two neighbors, and we kept our space. Catherine wore a mask. I think mine was kind of off and on. I had one of these little pull-up winter collars of some sort. And we had a blast. We had an absolute blast. And you really, it's precious. And you have to value that.
Well, what connections you do have
with
people seem to mean more. Yeah.
So,
And
I'll say this about this interesting time. A lot of distraction is stripped out. And so some of this feeling it's intense. And that's new for a lot of people. It's quite intense. There's no, in some ways, this is kind of bad language, but hey, kind of the false gods have disappeared. There's no sports. There's no this. There's no that. And so you're stuck with you and you in some ways, depending on your.
Well, and there's good things about that. And then there's the watching other people experience grief and experience loss that also affects us. Like I said to you yesterday, for me, I think the hardest part is seeing other people's loss.
Yeah.
In one way or another, I have clients that are really struggling because they have businesses that they can't operate. And, I have one client that has two businesses he can't operate. And so, trying to keep those people out of the panic level and into the moment is a challenge,
That's right.
So.
And I have this experience with feeling probably the same as you. It is something that can be quite consuming.
Yeah.
We use this language rabbit hole. You can start traveling in this thing. And at the same time, it's an interesting brain activity, neurologically, but it's also something that we really should check. And we probably have to check that activity with someone else. I think that's
I would agree with that. I've said to my husband, am I being really harsh about this? Yes, you are.
Oh, yeah.
Or, yesterday I spoke to someone and they were like, the whole SBA loan thing is a nightmare for so many people. And my client yesterday morning that I saw was like, I just can't. I'm just going to give up. And I'm like, no, don't give up. Keep yourself in the same place that you are at your bank, because you don't want to get behind everybody else that hasn't applied, right? Trying to keep people from flying, the fight or flight, right? Yeah. I tend to fight, and other people tend to flight. So I've had just people around me whose perspectives are much more negative than mine tend to be, that have really gone far more negative than I could even have thought they would have, and have to say to them, it is what it is now. It will be something different in a month.
Yeah.
We can't control this. You can't sit here and catastrophize everything that's happening, because it really doesn't help you function daily.
Well, and you'll get it wrong. If
definitely.
In the future,
definitely. So that to me is a part of like feeling other people's grief, because we all have a way of dealing with that. You've already done the whole like get to happiness part though. I'm in admiration of you. So I'm probably at moments of acceptance right now. I had a real bad morning part over the weekend, but because we have a friend who is losing her health insurance and who has a brain injury, and to hear her talk about her husband that she separated from losing his job, and her losing her job, and her trying to figure out how to pay for Cobra to keep health insurance just hit me like a ton of bricks. Yeah. And I was like,
I'm sure that,
boy, boy, have I been selfish thinking about how stressful this is on me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think we all go through some of those, motions. And some days you just have a bad day. And like Monday, I was dealing with the SBA stuff, and I finally just said, I'm taking a nap. And I went and took a nap. I felt a lot better when I got up. So.
Hey, let's move on. That's a tough slide to get through right there. Let's get through it by clicking it.
Yeah. Oh.
By avoid.
What about attachments? We had an email from somebody in our committee who talked about how this situation is going to deprive people of their identity that they have tied up in their jobs.
Yes.
I don't feel like I have that identity issue. I know you don't, but it is hard to feel like you've wrapped yourself up into attached yourself to something to give yourself value.
Yeah.
Don't you think? I mean,
yeah,
what do you say to people when they do that?
And I think it gives words to something that we all do. If this is new language to anyone, it may not be, but I know that, culturally, Buddhism and, people talk about desire and attachments and all the rest. And it's, I used this language earlier, but I'll use it again, kind of these false gods in some way. The image we have of self, probably important in a way, but in another way, hey, let's make sure that can develop organically and based upon reality. And no doubt about it, if there's some addiction that I've kept intact, it's to my ego. It's my addiction to my own thinking. It's a mess in some ways, and in other ways, it's not.
Do you think addiction rates will increase because of this?
I don't know. I've watched some folks really get busy with recovery, and that may go to the comment earlier on step into an Al-Anon meeting. Listen, see if you connect to any of it. And on the other hand, I certainly think that it travels in a downward trajectory. That if we're talking about chemical addiction and the rest of it, I'm sure that this would be a strange time to initiate a recovery, and yet I've watched it. I join this young people's recovery meeting from time to time. I'm invited, I'm waved in, and some people said, hey, I'm 2 weeks into this. And so it's a real interesting time to focus on something worthwhile. And so I don't know the answer, though.
I don't think we have any answers.
No.
Personally. I think it's a personal, while it's a group sense of grief, it's also very personal to each person.
Yeah. I can tell you that 9/11 to me was, as somebody who was not very well at the time, that really troubled me. Beyond the way it may have troubled some other people. I was in Cincinnati, Ohio, thinking my world was coming to an end. And it was dishonest then, and it's dishonest now.
So someone is asking us if there's a mourning process to these attachments, and how do you protect yourself from the process of feeling grief?
I don't think
any of these things. You just feel it. I guess for me, I feel like you have to let that emotion be and not tell yourself that it's wrong or it's bad, because it is just there and it will go its own way.
I will say this, and this is an experience that some of us have already had. My mother died January of 7, okay? And I was well enough for that. And it was natural. She lived a nice life. She had a cancer. It went on a while. We had a very clean relationship. This was not ripped from me. I did not lose my mother as a young person due to her car accident. That didn't happen. This was the most natural happenstance. And I had a clear relationship with her. So this was a natural attachment that was going to disappear. And it did, in a way. And 4 or 6 months later, I wasn't in any way going to harm myself, but I was I'll use, and homicidal is a little bit strong, but I was difficult. I was out of sorts. And I called somebody I knew quite well. She was a nurse and she had done an assessment for me years earlier. I said, Cheryl, something's wrong here. And she goes, Patrick, your mother just died. Well, she hadn't just died. It was 4 months earlier, some number of months earlier. And I thought, wow. And as soon as she called it what it may have been, it was just, wow, I was restored. And it's to say that grief's going to manifest however it shows up. And I think the key is to go, hey, something's wrong. I think time and time again, my experience has been isolation is a seedbed of dysfunction. And the antidote for human suffering in some ways is community. And so
I would say that. I also feel like that we can stay stuck at whatever level of grief that is our default. So for some people, it's denial. For some people, it's anger. For some people, people have different emotions attached to grief. Grief itself isn't the emotion. The emotion is all the things that go into grief, right? So if we have me, I tend to be, I tend to feel like I have to support others instead of supporting myself, which is not necessarily the best thing for me. And that's why I'm a lawyer, right? Because I have to fix everything for everybody else, right? So, so is there a timeline for this? No, I don't think there is, and I think that part of the issue, I feel like, is because we're all experiencing it, there's a big sea of emotion out there that we just step in and out of, depending on who we're with and the context, right? So you might be with somebody that's today angry and frustrated and trying to keep their life together because their business isn't working. And then you might be with somebody else who, like you, who is weathering the crisis quite well, So I think it's self-compassion and allowing yourself to just be with whatever emotion it is and say, hey, today I'm going to be angry, and that's okay,
When I'm misbehaving, in fact, or at least in my mind, I've played around with the question, what's really going on? And the only answer to that question that's ever come to me is, I'm scared. And it's just, that's the way it is. That's my experience with it.
Well, and I think there's a lot of fear right now. I mean, I think fear is like the, everybody thinks money is the thing that makes the world go around. And I always say it's fear, because a lot of your behavior, whether you do something or not, is based on whether or not you're afraid of what's going to happen at the other side of it. So,
Hey, let's not ignore this. There are some really neat resources and agencies that deal with with grief.
Right.
Really wonderful people, intensive work, once a week, twice a week.
Right.
Who really, they won't eliminate it for you. They will participate in the process. In fact, they'll serve in some ways as community.
Right. And you're right. You're correct that community and being vulnerable enough to tap into that community is an anecdote for a lot of this. And some of the things that your colleague put together, are helpful. It's good to stay in contact with people, even if they're on a screen, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's
So,
probably some people dying out there. We've been going for 40 some minutes.
yeah, we're almost there. We've already talked about your self-care. I don't know how much of this we really need to talk about. How do you feel about that? I mean,
I tell you what, nutrition, just that word, hey, we should really be consciously, purposefully nourishing activity, nourishing emotional fuel, mental fuel, really consciously, purposefully. If people like to read a particular author, read them. If there's, I don't know, just that word nourishing, nutrition impressed me.
well, you are right. We're about 10 minutes to 1, and I'm not sure if we have any questions out there. It's probably good that we have some closing remarks. I'm looking through the slides to see if there's anything that we really haven't hit, although we really didn't do the slide thing very well. I think this last slide, signs and symptoms of concern, is something that we probably should hit.
Yeah.
Because there are some people out there who this struggle is much, much worse than they're even letting people know. And so I'll let you do this slide.
Well, it's funny to say it in almost whimsical fashion, and I don't mean to, but this is another challenge in life. It's another challenge. It's a real tricky one. It's one you haven't had before. It's one you don't necessarily train for, or maybe you have trained for it all your life. It's interesting. And it's not to say, hey, it's not to deny anyone feeling hopeless, sad, I'm reading from the screen, anxiety, worry. It's not to say, to run down this rabbit hole. And I would suggest, and I make things up. And this is something I'm making up. I don't have credentials to say what I'm about to say. I think people have had in their life's experience certain traumas. I think that's unforgettable. Neurologically, you're stuck with it. It doesn't mean that you can't process it and use it to your advantage and all the rest. I'm sure much of this touches that. Okay. Sure. And I might be going deep into an area anyway, but let's get back out of that a second. And it's to say that, hey, it's difficult, it's challenging, all the rest. Well, right. So now what? And I think the now what is, hey, reach out. Let's make sure we're talking to one another. Let's make sure you're taking decent care of yourself. If, have a sleep pattern if possible. In some way participate. I won't forget this. Well, maybe I will. But at this moment, I have not forgotten it. Years ago, I was at this little gym, Cincinnati CrossFit. And there was some activity here and there. And this fella that I knew and admired was working out. And sometimes I'd give him a lift. And he was just kind of a big, strong guy. And I was in the middle of this little tiny workout, 10-minute workout. And I laid on the ground. I was exhausted. And he just walked by and he goes, Patrick, get up. And I got up and finished quite nicely. Had he not said that, I would have imagined I would have just tapped out at that time. And I don't know what that means to any of you, but for me, it was a moment in time. And I think we just have to do what you can do and be fine with, hey, I did not have this perfect day. I didn't get all these things done. That's okay. This is new territory, but my golly, be sure to form your relationships and to participate.
I think you have to, I have someone in my life that has a mental health disorder, and I think if you have that and it is something that has an anxiety base to it, this kind of thing is really, really can be debilitating.
Yes.
What I always say is you need to talk about it, because sometimes talking about whatever's making you anxious takes the air out of the balloon, so to speak, right? So we blow it up, and then we're like in that thought pattern. And if you can break that thought pattern, sometimes you can come back to home. What I've noticed and what I said to people, because I, as you know, started doing the mental health docket for probate court this year, is that it's a hard time when your life has some instability in it. And by instability, I mean, if you have a mental health disorder and you have an instability in your life, this, or whether you have a drug addiction issue or any other issue that you're trying to cope with or deal with, that brings on those challenges. And I like what you're saying in that you need to reach out to someone else. But I think the inverse is true, that we who know these people need to check in with them. Just like we're checking on people who are elderly, just like we're checking on, family members, just because it can be a slippery slope for many. And that includes lawyers in that bunch, because as you know, lawyers have a higher risk of anxiety than the general population.
Yeah.
That's my thoughts on that.
Yeah. I think that's right.
Whoa, I gone the wrong way.
Yeah, I found this in my, this was the first thing that came off my new printer.
True joy is harder to access and even harder to hold onto than anger or fear. Well, that's a good way of ending it. And
It's a hell of a challenge.
yeah. Thanks,
No,
Beth, for everything. You got any last comments?
I think it's step by step by step by step. We're just taking these little steps. And
well, which is what our governor ironically said yesterday, is that coming back out of this will be a step by step by step process.
Yeah.
And I think that that's true of our emotions as well.
And it's un-American, because we want to, I want it now. I'm accustomed to it. I should be embarrassed to tell you that I ordered a coffee carafe. Mine exploded on the basement floor. I bought a new one. It came, I think it was 2 or 3 days. I busted out the old percolator for a couple days, but it's now. And this isn't a now thing.
Right.
It's a great gift. If hardship's a pathway to peace, well, let's head for some peace. And this is just challenging.
Yeah,
I mean,
and I think what we come out of this as is going to be interesting. And it's the great unknown right now for me. And by that, I mean, will we come out of this? Will it break us of some of those nowness habits?
Yeah.
Some of that, will it slow us down as a culture? We shall see.
We shall see.
Yeah. So that's the end of our webinar. Just as an aside, I don't know if many of you know this, but the CBA has a YouTube channel. And in that YouTube channel, we have archived all the balanced living lectures that our committee has put on over the years. There's some on sleep, nutrition, exercise, dealing with, people of different personalities. And those are great resources if you find yourself wanting to spend time on YouTube watching something productive.
And there's no doubt that these are areas that have been well covered.
Sure.
But it's there. Some of that information's right there. And so if you connect to some of it, take a moment and look at it.
And if you have a webinar topic that you think the Bar Association should do in this situation, there was also a webinar last week, I believe, with the federal judges, which I actually saw part of, which was really good, about how they're operating during this crisis. If you have a webinar topic, please feel free to share that with someone at the bar. I'm sure that they've just now started doing these. This is the third one. So I think there's a lot of possibility for people to connect through this medium and for the Bar Association to be of service to its members. So have a good afternoon, everyone.
Hey, thanks very much.